The Roswell U.S. Air Force Base, State of Texas, 1952. At 10 in the morning, all pilots and personnel were put on high alert. Atomic bombs dispatched and delivered to their respective bombers. The only aircraft capable of taking this deadly payload to the targets on the other side of the globe is B-36 bomber. This giant flying craft brings death and destruction. It has the official nickname. It is called the Peacemaker. It can be called the Pentagon's Big Stick as well. Soon it will take off on its way to the Soviet Union. The bomb will be dropped on the capital city of Moscow. In reality, it never happened, but it was a part of a real drop-shot plan. And at the same time, B-36 played a role of a long arm with a bomb in its fist. There were over 300 cities marked for nuclear bombings, followed by full military assault and invasion of our country. Back then, in 1952, Soviet Union was not capable to respond to such threat. Cold War, battle above the ocean. Tushino Airfield, Moscow, August 1955. Usual fuss at Tushino Airfield due to an upcoming official Aviation Day air parade ceremony. There are plenty of small military airfields in the vicinity of Moscow. At nearly all of them, personnel is getting ready for the opening part. All aircraft being checked and finally rechecked. Pilots climb into their cockpits. Rows of paratroopers boarding troop carrier planes. Here are the MiGs. These fighters are well known to the Americans since the Korean War. Brand new aircraft starts its unusually powerful counter-rotating prop-driven jet turbine engines at Ramenskoye test facility. This is a newly constructed long-range Tu-95 bomber. Soon it will be presented at the official ceremony at Tushino Airfield. Escorted by 4 MiG fighters, Tu-95 appears on top of everyone at the parade. It wouldn't be right to say that this airplane made an impression. It shocked Western visitors and guests. In the later years, Pentagon personnel will refer to it simply as the Bear. From now on, the States lost its sense of security and safety. Russians got its own intercontinental range bomber, and they are capable of reaching US soil. The drop-shot plan is no longer reasonable nor actual. It didn't take much time for the United States to respond. President Dwight Eisenhower declares newly developed strategy of massive retaliation. He takes a new course of highly increasing nuclear capabilities and its potential. Now, recently developed ballistic missiles and submarines also used to deliver nuclear charges to the targets. Nuclear weapons make its first appearance even on board of aircraft carriers. The stationary ground-based missile launch can be easily detected. Space satellites were produced for that reason already. An aircraft launched off the carrier's deck is practically undetectable. Aircraft carriers with its escorting fleet becomes an advanced bridgehead for the attack on the Soviet Union. United States Navy develops nuclear-capable carrier-based bombers. There is always a plane with the nuclear charges on board, ready to be launched off the deck at any given moment. About 2 hours later, it can show up right above Moscow. Imagine the aircraft carrier with 100 nuclear heads on board. We were stating that the presence of such weapons has to be confirmed, but in reality everyone knew that there were plenty of nuclear charges on board of those carriers. Some of the aircraft launched off the deck in the Mediterranean Sea were capable of flying all the way to Moscow. So it was a threat. If I was in the Soviet Union facing such threat, I would certainly be concerned. By the fall of 1962, international tension reaches its peak level. Soviet leader Khrushchev decides to export land-based missiles to the island of Cuba, which is located right near the American shores. This is a direct threat to the safety of the United States. conflict takes place. It became known as the Caribbean Crisis. The world is on its edge. During the Cuban crisis, American spy planes constantly flying above Soviet ships. They photographed decks loaded with disguised weapons. Soviet High Command also decided to run the same type of intel missions. And the first thing we want to know, aircraft carrier routes, who's able or how to discover and locate them. There is only one answer to that, the strategic Tu-95 bomber that is capable of flying such long distances. Mission needs careful planning. Head of the Defense Ministry, Rodion Malinovsky, asked Soviet generals and commanders to do it. 20 years ago they won the war, but it was a victory on land, unlike these upcoming very difficult and complicated missions, which will occur mostly above an ocean surface. I remember being at the official meeting in the Defense Ministry. Rodion Yakovlevich Malinovsky asked us, the Air Force, a direct question. Why is that you are not flying over an American aircraft carriers? Because nobody ever ordered us to do so, we replied. So I am ordering you to fly over, he said. United States Navy base at Norfolk, Virginia, January 1963. Nuclear energy driven, the Enterprise aircraft carrier is getting ready to depart. Soviet Strategic Bomber Command got the order to intercept it. This mission cannot be flown straight through West European countries, because they belong to NATO. So the plan looks like this. 2 airplanes take off from Uzin Air Base and fly north. As soon as they pass Kola Peninsula, planes turn toward the Atlantic Ocean. They are expected to intercept Enterprise near the Azores. Pilots have a tendency to come up with sharp expressions. That's when some of them started calling these missions flights around the corner. First 2 flights end up unsuccessfully. Airplanes return to the base due to bad weather conditions. The 3rd pair of Tu-95 bombers is about to take off. By this time, the Enterprise is out of reach. The ship is in the Mediterranean to replace Forrestal carrier on duties. USS Forrestal will go back home, and it becomes a primary target for our planes. High Command cannot allow the 3rd attempt to fail. A highly ranked, honored pilot, a war veteran and division commander, Colonel Shikhanov, is charged to accomplish the mission. Strategic aerodrome of the 106th Air Division, town of Uzin, Ukraine, February 22, 1963. A day prior to the official Soviet military holiday, a couple of Tu-95s take off and stay on northern course. Our flight was a little different. We had our people on the ground sending reports directly to the High Command. I'm talking about our guys in Spain and Portugal. They warned us that the carrier just passed the Gibraltar Straits. They even specified an exact time when the carrier passed it. Late at night, our planes flew near Norway and Britain, and now they are flying over Iceland. All these countries have NATO military bases, but the flight is not noticed, not even a single fighter sent to intercept. The Atlantic Ocean, 200 miles north of the Azores Islands, February 23, 1963, 4 o'clock in the morning local time. Pilot navigator aboard Tu-95 sees a dot on the radar screen. No one can be certain if that's the Forrestal. Soon there is a circular pattern appears. It consisted of 12 glowing dots, with the brightest one situated at the center. It looks exactly like an aircraft carrier with its escorting fleet. Good quality images must be obtained. Colonel Shikhanov decided to get a bit lower. So we started to descend. At 5,000 meters we flew through the clouds and kept on descending. There were cloud breaks at 700 meters. That's when I first saw a huge ship. Aircraft approaching the carrier at an angle, and it is not convenient to photograph, so navigator Aparitsky asked the flight commander to make another pass. "Where do you directing me, son?" Shikhanov says. I had never done a second pass even during the time of war. Yet he did fly by the second time. When we dropped on them the first time, the main deck was all empty. There was nobody there, and most of the aircraft were covered with cloth. Only 2 fighter planes were not covered. The carrier just served its 6-month mission in the Mediterranean Sea. All sailors on board the ship are totally relaxed on their way home. So they let their senses down and were half asleep. And then, in the middle of the night, there is some Russian bear drops on their heads from up above. A few minutes later, a couple of phantoms dispatched off the Forestal's deck to intercept our bombers. American pilots flew right alongside of our plane, but didn't attempt any aggressive moves. After a while, they broke off. Shekhanov takes back his plane with the prized snapshots of the Forestal. Officer in charge of the intelligence in our regiment didn't give us a direct answer whether we have a right to fly above those carrier formations. But after accomplishing the mission, he was so inspired and satisfied by the pictures taken that he became more honest. Nobody allowed to fly over the American sovereign territory. They have a right to shoot you down. Thanks a lot for the warning after our return, Comrade Commander. Pictures that they brought are excellent. We never had anything like this high-resolution images before. The very next day, the whole album, full of them, sent directly to Nikita Khrushchev and Moscow. He felt pretty much satisfied after seeing those images. The air crew has been awarded. Pilot gets the hunting shotgun. The navigator got a portable radio receiver, and others been issued special aviation appreciation citations. In the beginning, Soviet aircraft roaming freely above our fleet caused a lot of concern, and the reason is that these airplanes had bombs and missiles on board. Also, they were capable to aim submarine-based missiles onto our aircraft carriers. Americans knew very well the damage that nuclear explosion may cause to the nearby fleet of boats and ships. They ran the first nuclear test, codenamed Crossroads, on the open ocean back in 1946, soon after the end of World War II. What was a little piece of land called the Atoll Bikini became widely known to the whole world. There were plenty of vessels which served in a recent war nearby the epicenter. When huge amounts of water droplets settled down, it was an awful sight, so grim and discouraging. 8 ships were sunk, including Saratoga aircraft carrier. If there would be any people on board, no one would survive that blast. There was another reason to be concerned with Russian bears flying above an American ships. Historically, there was a sense of competition, jealousy, distrust, and constant conflict between the United States Navy and the United States Air Force Command. People working for the Air Force could have bring snaps of Russian bombers to the Pentagon and supply them with comments. You see, we kept on telling you since 1920s that those aircraft carriers are so vulnerable. They can be sunk from the air up above. So the most danger wasn't the information about Russian airplanes themselves, but rather the danger of that info being used against the Navy to sink carriers using budget cuts. It was even worse to be sunk by the budget cuts rather being sunk by the real bombs at sea. Successful flight of Shekhanov's crew opens new route, but now our opponents were much more careful. Radar stations at every NATO base on constant alert and working around the clock. Skies above the ocean under total control. Bright orange tail F-102 fighters immediately sent to intercept as soon as our planes appear on their radar screens. Right after that, the carrier gets the message. Russians are coming. United States aircraft carrier America, December 1965, somewhere in the Atlantic Ocean. We got a word that a couple of Tu-95 bears approaching our recently built, newest and most advanced carrier. First, we've been warned when they passed Kola Peninsula. The next warning came as soon as they were near Iceland. 4 of our carrier-based fighters were always on standby with pilots inside, wearing their gear, ready to be launched within 5 minutes. As strange as it may sound, our flybys were good for the Americans. It presented real opportunity to teach and to train new pilots and interception maneuvers, tactics and techniques. Quite often, the intelligence asked pilots to photograph some specific parts of Russian aircraft. We flew in a tight formation together pretty close to the Russian plane. It was a kind of nerve-hammering experience. Who would give up first? Also, we were given cameras to photograph some newly installed antennas at the tail section of the bear. At some point, we got so close to the aircraft perhaps like 2 feet close, and my navigator was constantly pressing the shutter button as he was crazy. Then I saw big Russian bear started to bank toward my jet. I said, that's enough. It's been a good sport, but I don't want to cause any trouble.
Это хороший спорт, но я никому не хочу создавать неприятности.
I saw that Russian gun operator at the tail end of the bomber. He shook his fist when he saw me, but I kept on saying to myself, we are not enemies, rather the opponents. How you doing? Thank you.
Have a nice day.
The fact that Americans wanted to obtain pictures of Russian bombers with their fighter planes alongside requires explanation. These photos were used as a proof for the people in Pentagon. If we are flying right alongside Russians, it proves that in fact we did successfully intercepted them and really had a chance to take them out of the sky. The best image that Navy pilots aimed for was a picture of the Soviet Bear bomber with our jet fighters alongside and an image of the carrier on the background. And if the carrier captain missed the chance to get these photographs, then he lost some major points in his military service career.
Very good for your service reputation. Secretary of Defense.
On one of the official press conferences, Robert McNamara declared that if we were able to photograph Russian bombers, it means we had a real chance to shoot them down, which was the truth in most, but not in all instances. Some of the Russian bombers were discovered and identified hundreds of miles away, but some were first observed by sailors right at the time when they literally dropped down from above on top of our heads. Usually, by the time our planes were spotted, its crew been in flight for 8 hours or so, and there wasn't too much thought given about pilots' conveniences. These bombers were built only to achieve its purpose. The roaring hum of the engines, and Tu-95 has the loudest engines on Earth, same dry rations every flight, red and irritated eyes caused by motor oil in the heating and ventilation system. These are constant dangers and difficulties that our brave pilots face during long-range reconnaissance missions. Pilots are human beings, and they do get tired, yet they must fly all the way back home. After about 6-7 hours in flight, you may feel some discomforts. Some of us had hallucinations, especially when we flew up north, close to the pole. There were northern lights up in the skies, some blinking shadows. As you try to focus your eyes on the inside of the cockpit, it looks fine. But when someone is trying to look outside through the window, there are some very strange lights glowing out there, and you feel like the plane is moving sideways or even upside down. Shake up and a quick glimpse onto a dashboard to see gauges usually cure these things. Besides visual difficulties and exhaustion, there were more common problems that our pilots were constantly facing during long flights. Humans have to eat and to drink, with all its consequences. We had a metal bucket for the toilet. It was located behind the flight engineer, but our guys got used to this kind of conveniences and tried either not to use it at all during the flight or use it only for little needs. It was indeed very inconvenient to work aboard those planes, but folks learned to deal with it. Nerve-wracking game begins when NATO jet fighters first appear on the horizon. Exhaustion is no longer there. Any difficult situation has a hidden danger, especially when your adversary right nearby and not about to give in. There is always a possibility and chance that somebody wouldn't be able to hold on to his emotions and feelings. Some younger and less experienced pilot, Russian or American, who would have what we call a trigger itch, might have thought that his carrier or his bomber is under attack, so he might get a feeling that he can actually prevent big and bad things from happening and easily could open fire. If something like that would really occur, some pilot would start shooting or something. Then we would never know for sure what was really going on there, because the Atlantic Ocean is a vast open area and there are no witnesses to the event, just our aircraft, our pilots, or theirs.
Наших самолетов и самолетов противника, в кавычках противника.
July 15, 1964. First tragic accident happened in the Sea of Japan. Tu-16 flew a reconnaissance mission that day. This aircraft been called a Badger by NATO commanders. Americans used to say that the Badger is a little beast, but highly aggressive. This particular Tu-16 never made it back that day. Its whereabouts and the fate of its crew are still unknown to this day. 4 years later, there was another incident. Essex aircraft carrier, May 1968, Sea of Norway. When Essex first appears near the shores of Norway, Soviet North Fleet Command immediately dispatched destroyer Сознательный. We left Severomorsk on May the 3rd of 1968. Our general mission is to carry out naval duties in the North Atlantic. We also got a special order to watch closely Essex aircraft carrier, to report its every move and all the actions on board. Imagine that there is an aircraft carrier formation near the Norway shores, which is right next to our major secret naval base, Severomorsk, and all the American boats are practically right in front of its gates, same as American tanks would appear in the vicinity of Moscow. So all of our ships in the Northern Sea were on high alert. Naval High Command often launched reconnaissance aircraft. These planes were closely monitoring actions of our so-called guests. Classified report from the USS Essex captain to the Chief of Naval Operations. On May the 22nd, 13 Soviet jets and prop turbine-powered bombers flew over our ships on 8 separate occasions. Such high frequency of flybys remains the same in the next couple of days. We lost a carrier fleet on May the 25th. The aircrew headed by Miktat Shakirov returned to the base at 6 in the morning. They were unable to locate Essex. The pattern of our planes descending every 4 hours upon our adversaries was carefully measured and pre-calculated. It had to be no less than once in 4 hours, so all the aircraft involved took into the air every 6 hours. On May the 25th, Shakirov and his crew got back to the air base empty-handed. They couldn't find Essex carrier. Navy commander asked the aviation commander straight question. Where is your report? Where is Essex? What could he possibly answer? High Command decided that there is only one crew which is able to correct Miktat Shakirov's failure. They want the best man for the job, the squadron leader, Lieutenant Colonel Pliev and his crew. And even though Pliev just been released home for vacation, he's been urgently called back to the base and ordered to locate missing Essex and its fleet. Alexander Mikhailovich Pliev was the chief pilot in the regiment. He taught everyone to fly extremely low. Pilots are capable of flying all the way down to the deck in order to evade radar detection. Recon missions are much easier to achieve that way. There were plenty of sea salt stains left on the plexiglass of Pliev's cockpit after such flights. Other pilots admitted that Pliev really taught them how to fight. Alexander Zakharovich took his comrade's failure close to the heart. Miktat Shakirov looked like he just took a beating when he approached us after landing. He lost the fleet. Miktatka, don't be so upset, says Alexander Zakharovich. I promise you, I'll find her. Severomorsk Naval Aviation Airfield, May 25, 1968. A pair of Tu-16 bombers takes off and flies toward Norway. Pliev got the order to find Essex and to intercept the carrier with the help of destroyer Сознательный located in the area. One of our planes is flying at high altitude, but Pliev leads its bomber just above the water. This way, he cannot be detected by ship's radar. Americans were totally surprised when they saw Pliev's plane right next to their carrier. Pliev confirmed on the radio that he had discovered and flew right above Essex. He also told me how many ships were in the formation and transmitted their coordinates. In about 2 hours, one of those guard vessels departed to meet us. We were able to read their flagged message. It said that the airship has water landed. That's how we translated it back then. What Americans really meant is that Pliev's plane had fallen down into the sea. From the carrier's captain official report, Russian Badger-class airplane, tail number 94, first appeared at 11:05 local time. The pilot made a few passes over the carrier at low altitude. During the last attempt, the front of the aircraft went too low while turning to the left. Then the aircraft impacted the water, exploded, and broke down into pieces, about 1400 yards away from the carrier's deck. There are always an assigned cameraman on board of any aircraft carrier, and the cameraman was not about to spare film that day. Later on, Americans will pass a copy to us. This material was immediately highly classified in the former USSR and has never been declassified ever since. But we were able to find this unique archival footage inside the National Archive in Washington, D.C. Now, viewers have the opportunity to watch it for the first time since 1968. We have decided to stop the frame so you can clearly see that Plev's airplane was flying at the ship's deck level. This bomber is over 140 feet long, but it was flying extremely low at 330 miles per hour, less than 50 feet above the surface. After yet another pass, Plev tried to make a U-turn right above the carrier. The operator shuts off his camera. The accident occurs just moments later. Like everyone else, the photographer is shocked by the unfolding events. He forgets to adjust brightness, range and focus controls at first. All what is seen is a bunch of sailors that witnessed the crash just moments before. Watching closely, choppers can be distinguished through the smoke cover. Essex tried to reach the accident site steaming at full power. Rescue helicopters also flew at the scene. Unfortunately, there were no survivors found. Minutes later, another Tu-16 descends upon the scene. They want to know whatever happened to Plev's aircraft and its crew. He flew airplanes, as they say, like a real ace pilot. He had an eagle-like vision, and his sense of control was tough like an iron. There were rumors that the radio-controlled helicopter obstructed the bomber's path. Trying to avoid a mid-air collision, Plev made a violent turn which caused the crash. Knowing the fact that at the time he was flying about 50 feet above the surface, it is very much possible that he did strike the water. Americans found pieces of the broken plane and remains of the crew. Rescue boat takes them to the carrier. According to the official American report, the Soviet plane touched the surface with its wing while turning and then fell into the water. Besides the aircraft carrier personnel, nobody witnessed the event, so this version is taken for the truth. From the USS Essex Captain report, at 16:10 military time, Russian destroyer Bound number 311 got alongside the carrier to receive bodies of the Plev's crew. At 16:27, a rescue boat has initiated the transfer procedure. Boat number 311 is a Soviet destroyer Знаний. At last, the Soviet ship meets the aircraft carrier. After short negotiations, sailors transfer pieces of the plane and bodies of our pilots. One last time, they take off into the air, suspended to the crane's arm, and packed into an individual plastic bags with zippers. A net full of an unfortunate load received by the ship's personnel. And there is a folder at the end of the line that contains a full accident report. Our sailors carried body bags. They were partially unzipped on the side of the head, so we could clearly see human bodies and not anything else inside. Later on, our own doctor closely examined them. Americans took a chance to photograph the Soviet ship at close range. They remember that there is a Cold War going on even during all these circumstances. When body transfer procedure is over, 4 airplanes took off the carrier's deck. They fly information about our ship, paying final respect to the fallen aircrew. And Сознательный fires its main caliber guns for 3 times. Kremlin, Moscow, May 22, 1972. An official visit of the American president just begun.
Американского президента в СССР.
Richard Nixon has arrived to meet Brezhnev. Now there is a warm period in the era of the Cold War. Leaders of both countries are signing agreements to limit nuclear missiles and the offensive strategic weapons. They also worked on one more important document during that visit, the official Soviet news broadcast. Another agreement was signed today. It is related to incidents at sea where Soviet and American ships might be involved. The agreement signed by the head of the American naval forces and his Soviet counterpart, Admiral Gorshkov. In the fourth paragraph of this agreement, it is noticed that the air crews on both sides must observe a great deal of caution and common sense approaching aircraft. It is in their mutual interest to avoid any kind of provocative movements and reckless or aggressive flying maneuvers. The agreement is due to be enforced on May 25, 1972. By some strange coincidence, exactly 4 years prior to that, Pliev and his crew died in a crash at sea. Agreements are just an agreements, but pilots keep on flying next to each other just like before. John F. Kennedy aircraft carrier, November 1973, Sea of Norway. War in Vietnam just ended. Any provocations expected at that point? Tu-16 bomber headed by the chief pilot Lieutenant Colonel Sviridov takes off from Severomorsk on recon mission. Weather condition is awful. Clouds as low as 400 feet. Low-flying plane is already too close when it was first identified. Immediately, there was a Phantom launched off the carrier's deck to intercept the target. American fighter jet gets close alongside under the wing of our bomber. Phantom's vertical stabilizer is above the bomber's wing surface. Any sudden move may cause collision of both aircraft. I saw pilots inside the Phantom up close. I saw their faces, writings on their helmets, and marks on the fuselage. Our tail gunner constantly called us on the intercom and asked not to use ailerons. "Commander, don't turn the ailerons. This part hits the top of the Phantom's body." But how can we not use it? We flew at 300 feet, and our plane banks to the right. We kept on losing altitude. Right away, I remember Pliev's accident. Those pilots also were in a turning process, losing their altitude. We as well may become next in sharing their fate. So the only thought was not to share fate with Pliev's crew. American pilot tried to fly away, but struck front edge of the wing with his vertical fin in the process. Fighter pilot miscalculated and went up a bit early, striking wide wing of the Badger. He destroyed the Phantom's tail while trying. Most of his vertical stabilizer was gone, cut down to the fuselage. Our aircraft was damaged too. We had dents and holes in our wing surface. I kept on thinking about that Phantom and its pilot. How is he planning to make it back to the carrier's deck with no tail? Poor guy. How are you going to land? Will you eject or what? There are fuel tanks located inside wings of Tu-16. Luckily, they were not damaged. Otherwise, the aircraft would lose fuel and fire could break out. The whole wing could collapse. All these things happening thousands of miles away from home. So I was thinking to myself, we would run out of fuel and then dip into the sea. Life vests won't protect against low water temperature. How long can anybody withstand water that cold? 1 hour? Please, let me shoot myself. Get into that life raft, take out the gun, put it next to the side of the head and pull the trigger. That's all. Because what's the reason to do otherwise? Even if a rescue party will ever reach the site, I'll be long dead by then. Fortunately, everything worked out well that time. The American pilot has managed to land his jet in Norway. There was no way for him to bring it down on the deck of the carrier. Sviridov flew his aircraft back to Severomorsk. The whole thing was considered as an act of bravery on the side of our crew. All crew members received special awards. Sviridov received Order of the Red Baron, a War Merit Award during the time of peace. City of Vladivostok, USSR, November 1974. Brezhnev meets American President Gerald Ford. Those were the official negotiations on the strategic arms race. 5 years later, Soviet Union enters Afghanistan. This act diminished all previous peace efforts and initiatives. As a result, US Congress refused to ratify the Strategic Weapons Treaty. Ronald Reagan, the tough Republican, comes to power in November of 1980. President Reagan was the one who called Soviet Union the evil empire, and just like any other evil, it must be fought against. Recently developed Pershing missiles were placed in Western Europe. There were plenty of new ships built. They were equipped with long-range Tomahawk missiles on board, and there was an immense massive pressure that threatened the Soviet state. In 1983, the Soviet Union arms itself with its own version of Tomahawk intercontinental ballistic missile, the new aircraft-based Ha-55. It is a Russian response to the American threat. This missile is capable of flying at a range of 2,500 kilometers at extremely low altitude, evading radar detection and carrying its deadly payload to the target. There is also a newly upgraded and modified Tu-95MS model bomber. It is armed with 16 Ha-55 ICBMs, and just 2 years later, America gets Soviet bombers patrolling US shores around the clock. These bombers are stuffed full of nuclear missiles. We were ordered to organize and manage daily patrols of US sea borders, using our bombers with nuclear chargers on board. These aircraft were refueled in midair, once on their way to the American shores, and again on the way back. Now we were flying not just around the corner, we flew straight to the American shores.
Из Советского Союза к берегам Америки.
This type of mission might stretch for as long as 24 hours. All crew members spend a lot of time preparing for these long flights. As usual, special attention paid to prepare our men ideologically. A day begins with a formal gathering and raising the flag. New orders and commands issued and the anthem played. Then pilots take their places in the cockpits. The squadron banners taken to the airfield, so our pilots can see them during takeoff. Strategic missile carriers fly away to complete their mission. They will fly a direct route through the North Pole. We flew along the shore. Sometimes we would deviate and drift off course. It was practically impossible to follow the shoreline precisely. I think that if we would get a bit deeper inside foreign territory, then our plane would positively be shot down, just like that Boeing was. Do you really think if we would fly above some Aleutian Islands, they wouldn't shoot us down? I'm sure they would. We've been long expected. Approaching shores of the American continent, our planes first met by the F-15 fighter interceptors of the Tactical Wing Command based on Alaska. What I've noticed first trying to intercept these bombers, at the range of 1,000 feet, the jet and my whole body would start to vibrate violently. I could hear the immense loud deafening engine noise, even inside the cockpit. Normally I wouldn't hear a sound of the jet engines of my wingmen flying right next to me. Then at the distance of about 500 feet, I could actually feel the bear's huge and powerful engines hammering up my whole chest. Thanks to Lieutenant Colonel Ace, who took his video camera into the cockpit, you are able to see this unique footage. Ace has added the soundtrack from the famous Hollywood blockbuster The Hunt for the Red October to his video. They were flying along our borderline in Alaska, though it didn't seem like they were about to cross it, so we just followed them, observing. If the bomber would show some signs of a different kind, I'm sure we would react in a different manner, even if it meant using force. But we had to play out other scenarios too. What if the bomber's pilot has entered our territory to get a political asylum, just like Viktor Belenko did? He flew his MiG-25 fighter over the Soviet border and landed it in Japan. The pilot that does the actual flying is in command. He's got the ability to think strategically. There are anywhere between 6 to 12 nuclear missiles on board the plane. That's why the pilot in charge of a strategic long-range aircraft can be compared to a captain of a nuclear U-boat, at least. Thanks to Pyotr Stepanovich Dainekin, who made it possible, our pilots and the whole crew were paid the same amounts for those reconnaissance flights as for the wartime special missions. Although that wasn't a substantial amount, but rather more symbolic, yet everyone aboard knew that they are flying into a war zone, because we didn't fly empty-handed, you know. We were armed with nuclear missiles. Americans did suspect Russians that were flying along their borders were equipped with weapons which are capable as Pershings or Tomahawks. It takes about 20 minutes for the airplane to reach a major city along the US shoreline. The launch of a missile is practically undetectable. That is the reason why the American jet fighters followed Russian bombers along its route.
When we first arrived on the scene,
When we first arrived on the scene, there was some tensions. Neither we were not familiar to them, nor them familiar to us. After a little while, tension lowered a bit. So we thought, you're flying at your altitude and I'm flying at mine. Now we all can relax a little and enjoy the view. You are watching us, but we are watching you. Don't do anything sudden. We are both cool.
Я слежу за тобой, ты следишь за мной. Все круто.
everything's cool.
American pilots used different things to break up the routine monotony of the flight. Sometimes they would take Playboy magazine with them into the cockpit. They would unfold it and stick a picture to the plexiglass so the Soviet crew could see it.
Они с интересом
They took an interest looking at those images when we showed them. So there must be something good in a Western rotten society, even though those were often called low moral qualities.
моральными качествами.
Some of the pilots
It's true that some of our pilots showed American cigarettes and whiskey through the bubble canopy to the Russians.
В окне.
That bottle was factory sealed.
I hope.
Но ситуация могла резко измениться.
The situation could change in an instant. For example, if the crew would try to launch the missile of the bomb bay doors would just get opened. It's not hard to guess further actions of an American pilot.
I think the first thing I would do
Я думаю, первое, что бы
In
я
that
сделал,
case,
это
I
пошел
think
бы
I would try to push the bomber off its course.
Конечно,
And
постоянно
certainly I would try to warn Russian pilots on the radio not to do
агрессивный
it.
шаг. Возможно, я бы подлетел.
Perhaps I would try to get underneath the bomber to take a glimpse inside his bomb bay.
Что-либо.
It did look like he was
If I'd be sure that he's about to launch a missile, I'd be forced to shoot him down.
Его сбивать.
There is no one there to help us in the neutral airspace or waters. Just a single fighter plane would do anything as he pleased with a pair of our bombers. I did realize it clearly. I realized how it all may end up. Those were not some childish games we played. As a matter of fact, the skies of the Cold War were really hot. There were plenty of pilots who got killed on both sides, Russians and Americans. The list full of these incidents is endless. True facts about them are still classified and kept in the secret archives.
Секретных архивах.
Those who fought in Afghanistan don't like to talk about it, just like troops that fought in Chechnya don't like to talk about the Chechen War. Same thing with us. There have been lots of changes since those times. We don't like to discuss these issues. We were raised that way. We were made by the Soviet system, so we always thought that we were doing the right things. It was a totally different era. 20 years passed since then. What else to say? July 16, 2004, the 22nd Long-Range Strategic Division Aerodrome, City of Engels, Russia. Just like before, Tu-95MS strategic bombers remain in service for the 21st century, flying on reconnaissance missions above the world oceans.
На разведку в океан.
Now they're flying alongside with Tu-160, another great airplane produced by the famous Aircraft Design Bureau of the famous great country. It is so graceful and it flies so good that they have called it a white swan. There was a new tradition born about 10 years ago to personalize this aircraft with names of a real great patriotic war hero pilots. And who knows, but perhaps sometime in the future we will see other names painted on their fuselages. Names of those real heroes that fought the hottest battles of the Cold War, the war which they rather not discuss.